The Battle of Leyte Gulf, fought from October 23 to October 26, 1944, was the largest naval battle in history and the culminating engagement that effectively destroyed the combat power of the Imperial Japanese Navy, IJN. It was a desperate, complex Japanese attempt to halt the American invasion of the Philippines, an archipelago vital to Japan for its war materials and the oil supplies from the Dutch East Indies. The battle was characterized by flawed Japanese strategy, critical American command confusion, and the dramatic, chaotic fighting across 4 separate actions. Strategic context and opposing plans. The American imperative, MacArthur's return. By late 1944, U.S. forces had pushed close enough to the Philippines to begin the final assault. For U.S. commanders, the islands represented the next logical step toward Japan. For General Douglas MacArthur, who publicly promised to return after his 1942 retreat, the invasion was deeply personal. The target, initial planning focused on Mindanao, but rapid success in air attacks by Admiral William Halsey's Task Force 38 against Japanese air power, eliminating around 500 land-based aircraft, showed minimal resistance. This led to a key strategic shift. The Leyte invasion was moved forward from December to October. Command and communication issues. The rapid shift created immediate logistical and command problems. The invasion fleet, commanded by Admiral Thomas Kinkaid's 7th Fleet, was protected by older battleships and lightly armored escort carriers. MacArthur insisted that Halsey's powerful 3rd Fleet, Task Force 38, provide air support due to the coming monsoon season, which would ground land-based air cover. The fatal order. U.S. Pacific Fleet Commander Admiral Chester Nimitz agreed to the support, but issued a crucial, overriding directive to Halsey. In case opportunity for destruction of major portion of the enemy fleet is offered or can be created, such destruction becomes the primary task. This order, combined with MacArthur's veto of direct communication between the 3rd and 7th Fleets, created a dangerous operational disconnect that would be disastrously exploited by the Japanese decoy plan. Japan's desperate gambit, Plan Show 1. The Japanese strategy was codified as Show 1, Victory 1, a name many Japanese commanders knew was optimistic given recent defeats, which had decimated their pool of experienced pilots and air strength. Despite this weakness, they retained formidable surface assets, particularly the giant Yamato-class battleships and destroyers capable of powerful torpedo attacks. The IJN's combined fleet was dwarfed by the U.S. 3rd and 7th Fleets, which deployed 34 fleet and escort carriers, a nearly insurmountable disadvantage in modern naval air war. Japanese planning was further hampered by continued rivalry between the Army and Navy and a fatal fuel logistics problem. The fleet, stationed far from Leyte at Linga Roads, could only sail once the U.S. target was confirmed, meaning its arrival would be days late, missing the critical landing phase. Admiral Somu Toyoda, confident Leyte was the target, split the combined fleet into 3 major formations, aiming for a coordinated pincer movement that relied on concentrating forces at a precise time. 1st Diversionary Force, Center Force. Commanded by Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, this was the strongest group, built around the Yamato-class battleships. Its mission was to pierce the San Bernardino Strait and attack the U.S. invasion fleet from the north. 2nd Force, Southern Force, comprised of Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima's force and a separate group under Admiral Shoji Nishimura. Their objective was to enter the Leyte Gulf from the south via the Surigao Strait. Mobile Force, Main Body Northern Force, commanded by Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, this was the carrier force. Lacking planes and pilots, its sole mission was to act as a decoy to lure away Halsey's Task Force 38, clearing Kurita's path. Most Japanese naval officers viewed the plan's complexity and timing dependencies as unworkable, believing they would arrive to find only empty transports or obsolete invasion support vessels. The preliminaries, Formosa and submarine ambushes. The air war over Formosa. Before the main Leyte landing, the first major clash occurred in the air over Formosa, Taiwan, beginning on October 12, as Task Force 38 renewed air attacks to prepare the invasion zone. The U.S. launched approximately 1,370 sorties, but the Japanese threw all available aircraft, including those assigned to the show operations, into what was intended to be a decisive air battle. Japanese forces assembled around 860 operational aircraft, a number nearly matching Task Force 38's 1,000 planes. However, the Japanese pilots had minimal training. The American pilots quickly achieved air superiority, shooting down or driving away most Japanese aircraft, which were described as a heterogeneous air mob rather than a coordinated force. U.S. losses. Despite American dominance, Japanese torpedo attacks managed to badly damage the heavy cruisers USS Canberra and USS Houston. Japanese losses. The cost to Japan was devastating. Between October 10 and 17, they lost approximately 500 aircraft compared to 89 U.S. aircraft. Crucially, the Japanese convinced themselves they had inflicted a crushing blow, claiming to have sunk up to 17 U.S. ships. This exaggerated victory report contributed to their overconfidence in the viability of Plan Show 1. The Palawan Passage and the Princeton. The Japanese fleets began their approach on October 18, with Toyota implementing Show 1. Kurita, seeking to conserve precious fuel, chose to sail through the Palawan Passage, a known area of U.S. submarine activity, and fatefully neglected to deploy his destroyers in an anti-submarine screen. Submarine attack. On October 23, 2 U.S. submarines ambushed Kurita's center force. They sank 2 heavy cruisers, including Kurita's flagship, and heavily damaged a third. This early blow not only reduced Kurita's firepower but forced him to transfer command, further disrupting his already fragile coordination. The Princeton disaster. The Japanese, using the remnants of their air power relocated to the Philippines, achieved a single catastrophic air success. A bomb pierced the deck of the carrier USS Princeton, causing chain reaction explosions, including the ship's torpedo magazine. The ensuing blast killed and wounded 650 sailors on the light cruiser USS Birmingham, which was assisting in the firefighting effort, and sealed the Princeton's fate, forcing the Americans to scuttle her. This success highlighted the danger posed by the spread-out nature of Task Force 38, only one of whose 4 task groups was in a position to immediately intercept. The core engagements, October 24-25, 1944. The main battles unfolded over 2 days and are traditionally grouped into 4 distinct actions. The Battle of the Sibuyan Sea, Center Force. The Battle of Surigao Strait, Southern Force. The Battle off Cape Engano, Northern Decoy Force. And the heroic battle off Samar, Center Force versus escort carriers. The Battle of the Sibuyan Sea. On October 24, Kurita's center force approached Leyte Gulf via the Sibuyan Sea. Only Task Group 38.2, the weakest of Halsey's groups, was in a position to intercept. American aircraft were ordered to focus attacks on the largest ships, the Yamato and Musashi. Sinking of the Musashi. In wave after wave of attacks, U.S. planes, Avengers, Heldovers, and Hellcats targeted the super battleship Musashi. She was hit by multiple bombs and at least 7 torpedoes in the first attacks alone. Despite heroic Japanese damage control and heavy anti-aircraft fire, including from her massive 18.1-inch main guns, the Musashi was relentlessly targeted. By 7 p.m., after absorbing at least 16 bombs and 19 torpedoes, she sank, taking 1,000 of her 2,400 crew with her. The Musashi never fired a shot in anger at another warship during the entire war. Kurita's feint. Kurita temporarily ordered a withdrawal, which American planes observed, leading to exaggerated reports of damage. Halsey's command believed the first diversionary force was out of the fight. Critically, by focusing attacks on the Musashi, the Americans left the rest of Kurita's force, including the formidable Yamato, largely undamaged. Kurita soon resumed his course toward the San Bernardino Strait. The Battle of Surigao Strait. To the south, the Japanese Southern Force, under Nishimura and Shima, approached the Leyte Gulf via the Surigao Strait. Rear Admiral Jesse B. Oldendorf had ample time to prepare a classic ambush, the dream of any battleship commander. The ambush. Oldendorf positioned 6 battleships, 5 of which were Pearl Harbor survivors, 8 cruisers, and dozens of destroyers and torpedo boats in a tight, layered formation. The battle began with relentless U.S. torpedo attacks that sank 2 destroyers and the battleship Fuso. The last battleship duel. The remnants of the Japanese force sailed into the guns of the waiting American battleships, which crossed the T of the Japanese column, dominating the action. This was the last battleship gunnery duel in history. The Japanese battleship Yamashiro was destroyed by a combination of torpedoes and overwhelming U.S. shellfire. Admiral Shima, seeing the one-sided carnage, chose to withdraw. The Southern force was annihilated, securing the southern flank of the invasion force. Halsey's dilemma and the battle off Cape Engano. In the late afternoon of October 24, Task Force 38 detected Ozawa's northern decoy force off Cape Engano. This presented Admiral Halsey with the critical choice of the entire battle. Stay and defend. Remain at the San Bernardino Strait to block Kurita's supposedly weakened force. Strike north. Pursue Nimitz's primary task, the destruction of the Japanese carriers, which had escaped the previous Battle of the Philippine Sea. Halsey, determined to finally wipe out the Japanese carrier fleet, and believing Kurita was no longer a threat, decided to commit his entire Task Force 38 to a high-speed dash north, leaving the San Bernardino Strait completely undefended. The decoy works. Ozawa's plan had succeeded brilliantly. The Japanese carriers, which had almost no operational aircraft, were relentlessly attacked by 527 U.S. sorties, the largest carrier air attack of the war. Despite heavy anti-aircraft fire and frustrating Japanese maneuvering, U.S. planes sank 1 destroyer and 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers, crippling the 4th, including the mighty Zuikaku. Halsey's error. As the battle raged, desperate calls for help from the 7th Fleet further south, unaware Halsey had completely abandoned his post, began to reach him. Halsey was forced to turn around and race south, but too late and too slowly to catch Kurita. The command confusion, coupled with Halsey's aggressive pursuit of a decisive carrier victory, left the landing zone vulnerable. IV. The climax. Battle off Samar and the Kamikaze emergence. The unthinkable encounter off Samar. Kurita's center force, having survived the Sibuyan Sea and finding the San Bernardino Strait wide open, slipped through undetected and steamed south toward the Leyte Gulf. At 6:47 a.m. on October 25, they encountered a force that they mistook for Halsey's heavy carriers. Taffy 3, a small group of 6 lightly armored escort carriers and 7 destroyers escort destroyers from the U.S. 7th Fleet. The surprise. Both fleets were equally surprised. Kurita believed he had found the core of the U.S. carrier force, and Taffy 3's commander, Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, was suddenly face-to-face with the biggest battleships in the world, including the Yamato. Sprague's defense. Sprague reacted with magnificent decisiveness, ordering his carriers to launch all available aircraft, even unarmed planes, which harassed the Japanese and laid down thick smoke screens. Rain squalls provided crucial temporary concealment. The destroyer charge. Kurita, rushing his attack to destroy the fleet carriers before they could launch, allowed his formation to fragment. Sprague ordered his tiny destroyers and escort destroyers to charge the Japanese giants. Though completely outmatched, the destroyers USS Johnson and USS Hull, along with others, launched torpedo attacks that scored a hit on a Japanese cruiser and forced Kurita's destroyers to launch their own torpedoes from an unfavorable position. The USS Hull was hit 23 times and sank, and the Johnson, after a heroic fight, also went down. Their sacrifice bought precious time. Kurita's withdrawal. The combined effect of the desperate destroyer attacks, the continuous harassment by U.S. aircraft, and Kurita's persistent belief that he was facing a much stronger fleet carrier force, evidenced by the dye-colored shell splashes he assumed were from heavy ships, led to a controversial decision. Just as Taffy 3 was on the verge of total destruction, the mighty Yamato was about to open fire on the last two surviving carriers. Kurita inexplicably called off the pursuit and withdrew through the San Bernardino Strait. While some historians suggest he could have broken through to attack the invasion fleet, Kurita cited mental fatigue, fear of air attack, and the realization that any targets left in the Gulf were likely to be empty transports. The emergence of the Kamikaze. Immediately following Kurita's withdrawal, Taffy 3 faced a new, desperate threat. The first major use of Kamikaze, divine wind attacks. The tactic. This new Japanese tactic, adopted as a standardized strategy in the Philippines under commanders like Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, was based on a simple cost-benefit analysis. Pilots and planes were going to be lost anyway, so using them as guided missiles would inflict higher damage. The impact. The USS St. Lo, one of the escort carriers of Taffy 3, became the first major warship to be sunk by a kamikaze attack. The initial tactical success of the kamikaze was dramatic, achieving a nearly 10 times better chance of scoring a hit than conventional air attacks in this early period. Allied countermeasures. The Allies quickly adapted. Key countermeasures included VT, variable time fuse, a proximity sensor in anti-aircraft shells that exploded at the optimal point near an aircraft. Radar pickets, radar-equipped destroyers placed far from the main fleet to provide early warning and vector fighters for interception. Statistically, intercepting a kamikaze at 50 miles out reduced its chance of reaching a ship to 2%. Kamikaze legacy. The tactic was drastically expanded, with nearly 4,000 pilots eventually being sent out. While the majority of hits were scored against auxiliary vessels and destroyer pickets, which were the first ships encountered, the attack sank 66 Allied ships and caused over 14,000 Allied casualties by the war's end, demonstrating a terrifying level of sacrifice that failed to turn the tide strategically. Conclusion and strategic aftermath. The cost of the largest naval battle. The Battle of Leyte Gulf marks the end of major combat operations for the Imperial Japanese Navy. While historians debate the nuances of Halsey's decisions and Kurita's withdrawal, the strategic outcome was a clear U.S. victory. Japanese losses. The IJN lost 28 of the 69 ships assigned to Show 1, including 4 fleet carriers, 3 battleships, including Musashi and Fuso, 6 heavy cruisers, and thousands of highly trained sailors and airmen. Total Japanese casualties were estimated at 13,000 killed. U.S. losses. The U.S. lost 11 of the 300 ships involved, including 1 fleet carrier, Princeton, 2 escort carriers, St. Lo and Gambier Bay, and 3 destroyers, with 473 killed and 1,110 missing. Analysis of command and strategy. Japanese strategy. Many Japanese officers lacked confidence in Show 1 from the start. It was a strategy based on pre-war decisive battle thinking that failed to account for the vast disparity in naval air power and the critical fuel and timing issues. The late departure meant the best they could hope for was a heroic death against empty transports, not a strategic victory against the landing force. American command. The U.S. victory was achieved despite a convoluted and fragmented command structure resulting from coordinating the separate egos and commands of MacArthur and Halsey. Halsey's decision to pursue the decoy force, ignoring the San Bernardino Strait, remains highly debated. His defenders point to Nimitz's destruction of the enemy fleet order and the faulty intelligence suggesting Kurita was decimated. His critics accuse him of allowing the Japanese their only chance of success in the Gulf, driven by a desire for a decisive, career-defining victory. Ultimately, the Battle of Leyte Gulf secured the Leyte invasion and ensured that the subsequent campaign to liberate the Philippines, which was a long and bitter fight, would not be contested by the IJN. The U.S. now held undisputed naval supremacy in the Pacific, inching ever closer to the Japanese main islands and setting the stage for the final brutal battles of the war.